legends, I hope you're all fantastic. On today's video, we're going to do a preset build on the FM9. I'm using the latest public beta release for firmware 6, which not only adds a whole bunch of new amps and effects, it adds gapless switching between presets, channels, and scenes, which has changed the way I organize my presets. I want this preset to basically cover the sounds that I need for a typical ragdoll gig, so I'm going to use the USA Mark IV lead mid-gain amp model as my core tone with my free LTTV Mix 7 cab IR over here. You can see the high and low cuts there, and you can see the settings in the amp block as well as the output EQ settings over here. So this is the starting point for my distorted rhythm tone. Going for the tight, giant chungus thing right there. What I was doing previously to switch to my lead scene was on the Ideal tab, I was attaching a control switch to the input boost and the fat switch, which I could then activate on a scene-by-scene basis. Now what I've been doing is I've just been turning them on in channel B. So same settings between channel A and channel B. I've just kicked in the input boost and fat switch, and because channels now switch gaplessly, I don't have to worry about an audio gap in there. I think I actually have made one little tweak over here. I have turned up this 750 slider to -7 instead of -9, so it is slightly less scoop. Adding the fat switch kind of smooths things out, and adding the preamp boost adds more gain, which is always handy for playing lead. The thing that I want to add to this first, before I add any other effects, is I want to add a multiband compressor after the amp and cab. I really like this as essentially a dynamic EQ that will leave my tone wide open when I'm playing kind of open chords aggressively, but when I tighten up with my right hand and I start doing some low chuggy palm mutes, it will suck out a little bit of that excess low end. And in my blocks library, which is linked in the video description, you can load up these settings. So go to multiband comp, we will bring up Tighten over here, and basically all I have to tweak here is the threshold. So what I want to do on this mid-range monitor, when I'm strumming open, I don't want to see any compression, but when I go chug, 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 I wouldn't mind a little bit of compression. The obvious question is, why don't you just dial in less bass in your sound? I could achieve that by taking the amp block output EQ 80 Hz slider down a little bit, and the answer to that is I just like the way this works a little bit better. It's like the best of both worlds. I get that big low end bloom when I'm playing open, but it's a lot tighter when I am doing those palm mutes on there. Next, I want to add some depth and some width. To add some depth, I'm going to use the gold plate reverb, and to add some width, I'm going to use a dual detune, again using blocks from my library. The interesting thing that you might notice is I've got the detune after the reverb over here. So I'm using the gold plate, 1.5 seconds of reverb. I've cut a little bit of low end out of the reverb using the EQ section, and the mix is quite low. Then your kind of typical Eventide style, 9 cents up, 9 cents down, stereo detune over here. What I do like doing here is I like to engage the scene ignore parameter over here on both of these, so that I've got the flexibility if I'm doing a gig, say in mono, when the pitch detune isn't really going to do anything, I can just bypass it, and it's bypassed across all scenes. In a similar fashion, if I'm playing in a large echoey room, which isn't really that often, I can bypass the reverb across all my scenes. The scene ignore function is very handy there, but these two together, they bring the grease. Next up, I'm going to add the two great utility effects, the cheat codes that I rely on when I'm playing lead guitar. The first is just a wah in front of the amp controlled by an expression pedal In the pedal 1 jack, basically the crybaby type, I like to bring the maximum frequency down. Let's right click this and map it to pedal 1. Auto engage, I'm going to set up so that it's on a medium speed, and I'll have the off value at 95%. I grew up playing Dunlop style wahs, so when I'm in the toe down position, that's off for me. This sounds like a good crybaby wah. The next one is a stereo delay. I actually like using the Multitap delay here, and the Multitap delay I'm going to use for a few different functions in here. The main one is just going to be a massive greasy lead delay. So in my blocks library, you can see that I really like the Multitap delay over here. I'm going to use this Leon's lead block over here. I am going to connect it in parallel, so let's do that. And I'm going to turn the mix up to 25%. I will set the bypass mode to mute effects in, and I'll bring the level down by about 6 dB. If I'm on channel B of the amp block, so fat switch on, input boost on, bit of wah, bit of multi-tap delay, I'm basically in heaven. Having the delay and having the wah with all that gain just kind of feels like an extension of my instrument at this point. And again, people might go, Leon, you're using too much gain. Leon, the delay's way too wet. Guess what? You're not Leon. If you want to do it differently, you have the power to do it in your unit. But I found over the years of gigging this, when I step on that solo, I have a pretty good time when I'm playing lead guitar live. All right. What I wouldn't mind having, let's go back to channel A on the amp block. We will organize this into scenes in just a little bit, is I just kind of a very, let's say, vanilla dotted eighth note rhythmic delay. Rather than use a delay block, I'll just change to channel B over here, and I've actually saved these settings in here. I'm just using delay 1 and delay 2 from this quad parallel delay, set to the same rhythmic subdivision over here. What I've got is I've got the feedback at 30% for voice 1 and at minus 30% for voice 2. So the first repeat will be in phase, and then the subsequent repeats will be basically 180 degrees out of phase. It'll sound nice and wide. I do have a little bit of time modulation in here with LFO1 phase at 90 degrees. Let's have a listen to this. And then on channel C, I'm going to have these rotary inspired settings. I've got it in my blocks library as photary. So I'm using short delay times over here, and I'm using the chorus functionality of the multi-tap delay. So I'm applying chorus to each of the individual delay taps in there. You can see I've got some fast and some slow chorusing on there. This one, I kind of use just for an effect when I want to fill out some space. To finish up, there are two scenes that I'm going to have in this preset, each of which I only really use for one specific part of a song each in our set list. The first one is a recreation of the Eventide Undulator effect. So it is a plex delay with 8 delays in there. You can see the times in here. I actually just copied these straight from the Eventide Eclipse Undulator program under the expert mode. So shout out to Eventide for doing some amazing sound design back in the day. I love the way this preset sounds. A little bit of modulation on there, no filtering, but it is running into this tremolo that I just set up with a 16th note rate. So this will sync to the tempo. Basically, it's all in parallel. So I get this big blooming ambient reverb with a very fast tremolo that chops it up. The last element of this preset is this very fun timed filter sweep that I put together just to play a little section in the Ragdoll song Rust. So it is a resonant low pass filter over here. You can see I've set up the Q to be at 2 or 2-ish over there, a little bit of a low cut and high cut, and I've attached the frequency parameter to ADSR 1. Now I'm going to devote a scene to this, and on this scene, I'm going to change channels in the controller tab where I've set up the ADSR essentially to be timed for the exact amount of time that that section gets played. So sometimes we're playing it a little bit faster or slower live and the sweep doesn't quite reach exactly the same point, but you know, that's the beauty of live music in here. So you can see the settings in there. This one sounds super, super fun, and once I start playing, it will trigger and then sweep. The next step here is to just arrange this into scenes and to name the scenes. What I will give you are some examples of songs in our set that actually use these different sounds. To organize these scenes, I'm just going to use the scene manager. I want my lead scene to be scene number 2 over here. That's the only scene that's going to change channels in the amp block. So you can see I've got amp 1 set to channel A on every scene except scene 2 where it's channel B. Remember, that's the same amp with the input boost and the fat switch on. My cab is set to channel A across all scenes. My input and output blocks are channel A across all scenes as well. I'll go to the controllers tab first because I want these set to channel A on all scenes except for that lo-fi scene where we've got it on channel B. That's set up. Reverb and pitch detune are going to be ignoring scenes anyway, but I am going to come through here and just make sure that reverb is on channel A across all of them and that pitch is on channel A across all of them. The ones that I do have to organize are going to be this plex delay, the filter, and the multitap delay. So let's go multitap delay over here. We'll bring the filter up in this column and we'll bring the plex delay up in this particular column. Now, the plex delay I don't use on any scene except for that undulator scene. So we will just bypass it on every scene except for scene 6. Similarly, the filter I want bypassed across all scenes except for scene 5. While I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure I hit save. And then my multi-tap delay, check this out. I want it to be on channel A, my dual lead delay on my lead scene. I want it to be set up for that kind of vanilla rhythmic echo on the delay scene, so I've got it set to be there, and I want it set up for my faux rotary on my wobble scene over here. I am going to leave it off on the undulator scene as well, and you know, I'm not using scene 8 or scene 7, but I'll just leave them over there. So I've got all of my scenes organized like you just heard in those examples. The thing that I'm going to do here now is save this particular preset. I've named all my scenes. I'm going to save a copy of this to another slot, and I'm just going to swap out the amp in channel A and channel B. So what I've done is I've used the new 5153 100 watt stealth red model in here. You can see the settings on there, nothing too crazy. This one is really easy to dial in as long as you get that presence control cranked up above 9. Everything else in this preset is exactly the same, but I've got it saved right next to that other preset. So if the mood strikes me and I want to use a different amp at a particular gig, or if the Mark series isn't really vibing with me, I've got this one in here, which is a little brighter sounding, a little hairier. I'll let you hear the individual scenes in this one because it is super fun. I'm using the CC boost boosted in front of the amp over here. And on channel B, I've just turned the gain and the mid-range up on the amp instead of using the fat switch like on the Mark series amps over there. So let's just go through a few scenes. The last thing that I would do to organize this preset would be to populate the Perform tab with a few choice parameters that I might want to tweak at a sound check. The first one is going to be the high cut in the cab block. Playing at home, I like the high cut at about 8K, but I found playing live somewhere between 5 and 6K is usually a pretty good starting point for the high cut. It takes out all of that excess harsh high end without kind of sacrificing the body of the guitar sound. Some people like to leave it wide open. Some people like to cut it on here. It's kind of much of a muchness in my opinion, but I like having that option on there. The other one are the scene ignore parameters over here. So I'll map the reverb scene ignore and the pitch block scene ignore to the Perform page so that I can access them instantly without having to go to the specific blocks. I might put the low cut in there. I might put a few other parameters, but one that I do make a lot of use of are the scene levels. So I'm going to map the level for scene 2, my solo scene, over to the Perform page here. In fact, I'm going to set it up so that my solo scene is by default 3 dB louder over here. So when I switch to scene 2, this one's going to give me a nice boost. Anyway, I built 2 presets here that are going to give me all the sounds that I need for a ragdoll gig. I'll put them up on my Patreon page. If you want to grab them, you can grab my free cab IR in the video description. A shout out to everybody who has gone and checked out some ragdoll music or has signed up to my Patreon. I massively appreciate the support. Enjoy these patches and I'll see you next time.